My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 47 years old, and until 3:30 last Friday, I was a senior production engineer at Holloway Motion Systems in Detroit. I say was because that was the exact moment 19 years of loyalty got folded into a manila envelope and slid across a conference table like it meant nothing. There were 22 of us in that room. Every single one of us over 40, every single one of us being restructured out of the company we'd helped build. The room smelled like stale coffee, printer toner, and the kind of corporate dishonesty that always shows up dressed as strategy. Victor Holloway stood at the head of the table in a tailored navy suit, gold cuff links catching the fluorescent light. He had that polished executive voice people use when they want to sound compassionate without actually feeling anything. "Daniel," he said, pushing the envelope toward me, "you've been a valuable part of this organization, but Holloway Motion is entering a leaner, more adaptive phase. We have to make difficult decisions to stay competitive. Leaner, adaptive, competitive, corporate vocabulary is amazing. It can turn betrayal into policy." I opened the envelope, termination notice. Final payroll summary, severance, $500, that was what 19 years was worth to them. 19 years of late-night shutdowns, emergency line fixes, weekend process failures, supplier crises, missed dinners, and canceled holidays. $500 and a practiced expression. I looked up at Victor. He kept the same calm face. "We appreciate your professionalism during this transition," he added. Professionalism. That word almost made me laugh. I stood up, took the envelope, and walked toward the door. Just before I reached it, Victor spoke again. "Security will assist you with your exit. Standard protocol, standard protocol." As if I was the risk, as if I was the problem, I stepped into the hallway and immediately saw something that made the whole thing worse. The break area had been decorated, balloons, sheet cake. Fresh coffee in real mugs instead of the cheap foam cups they'd forced on us after the last budget cut. There was even a welcome banner hanging on the back wall. "Welcome EVANHOLLOWAY, Victor's nephew." 26 years old, fresh MBA, zero plant floor experience, no machine downtime history, no assembly line pressure. No understanding of cycle variance, scrap loss, or what a production stall feels like at 2:10 in the morning when a customer deadline is 6 hours away. But he had the last name, that was enough. He was standing there in pressed chinos and a company polo shirt, smiling for photos, while department managers shook his hand like the kid had just reinvented manufacturing. Someone handed him the keys to a company SUV right there in the lobby. Same building, same hour, same company. They were escorting me out while welcoming him in. The security officer walking me to my station was a guy named Harris, former Navy, good man. We'd talked cars a few times during his rounds. "Sorry, Daniel," he said quietly. "Orders from upstairs, I know," I told him. "You're doing your job." I cleaned out my desk slowly, a framed picture of my son Tyler in his baseball uniform. A stack of process notebooks with years of handwritten notes. A ceramic mug my ex-wife had given me years ago that read "World's Most Tired Engineer." A small desktop torque wrench I kept beside my keyboard as a paperweight. Without thinking, I picked it up and turned the setting dial higher. That's what I do when I'm under pressure. I calibrate things, I control what I can. When I got to the parking lot, I sat inside my truck for almost 10 minutes without starting the engine. Through the lobby glass, I could still see the welcome party. People laughing, phones out, Evan in the center of it all, smiling like he'd earned his place. My phone buzzed, a text from Tyler. "Dad, I heard about layoffs. You okay?" My son was 16, smart kid, junior in high school, good athlete, better student. He wanted to study engineering, and I'd spent years telling him that hard work, consistency, and skill still meant something in this world. Sitting there in the parking lot with a $500 severance check in my hand, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. I texted back, "I'm okay, heading home," but I wasn't okay, not even close. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Southfield after the divorce. Clean place, organized, quiet, but the part that mattered most to me wasn't inside the apartment. It was the garage workshop I'd built over the years. That was my real space. Workbenches, measurement tools, diagnostic equipment, a custom PC. Design software I'd paid for myself because Holloway's systems were outdated by nearly a decade. Shelves full of components, prototypes, and labeled bins. Everything arranged exactly where it belonged. That night I went straight there. Whenever life spins out of alignment, I start with tools, micrometers, calipers, torque wrenches. I checked every one of them, re-zeroed what needed re-zeroing, cleaned surfaces, verified tolerance. The ritual calmed me down enough to think. And when I finally sat at my workbench, my eyes landed on the steel filing cabinet in the corner. That cabinet held the one thing Victor Holloway had never taken seriously. For 4 years, I'd been building a predictive production optimization system in my garage. It started as a side project. Holloway kept ignoring the same recurring bottlenecks in the brake assembly workflow: line interruptions, unnecessary material handling, overcompensation in labor allocation, reactive maintenance scheduling. They were bleeding time and scrap, and nobody in leadership wanted to invest in solving it properly, so I started solving it myself. At first it was just spreadsheets, timing maps, and throughput models. Then it became an algorithm, then a full workflow engine. A system that could predict disruptions before they cascaded, redistribute flow in real time, and reduce manufacturing waste across multiple production environments. I'd shown an early version to Victor once, years earlier. He barely skimmed the summary before handing it back. "Interesting," he said, "but we're not in a position to pursue large-scale implementation right now." So I kept building it on my own time, with my own hardware, using my own software, in my own garage. In 2021, I filed the patent under my own name. In 2023, it was granted, and then life went on, until Saturday morning. At 8:47 a.m., my phone rang. A woman introduced herself as Claire Monroe from Vertex Motion Labs, a manufacturing systems company based out of Cleveland. She told me their research team had reviewed my patent and believed it had broad commercial applications well beyond automotive production. Then she said the sentence that changed my life. "We're interested in acquiring full rights," she told me. "Would $1.8 million be enough to begin discussions?" I actually stood up from my chair. For a moment I thought I'd misheard her. $1.8 million. The day before, I'd been dismissed with $500 and a security escort. Now someone was offering me real money. Life-changing money, college money, freedom money. We spoke for nearly half an hour. She explained their due diligence process, legal verification, ownership review, and acquisition timeline. If everything checked out, they wanted to move quickly. When the call ended, I just sat there staring at the filing cabinet. For the first time since the layoff, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt possibility. I should have kept it to myself. I know that now. But on Monday morning, outside the unemployment office, I ran into Marcus Reed. He'd been one of the few honest voices left at Holloway. Former military, union-minded, impossible to intimidate. He'd also been laid off that same Friday. We got coffee, talked about the cuts, talked about the consultants still on payroll. Talked about how leadership always found money for image and management while gutting the people who actually made the place run. And then I told him about the patent, about Vertex. About the offer. Marcus stared at me for a second, then grinned. "After what they did to you," he said, "I hope that deal closes and you never have to say Victor Holloway's name again." By Tuesday afternoon, Victor called me. His tone was almost friendly. "Daniel, I've heard there may be some intellectual property matter we need to review. Can you come in tomorrow?" The minute he said review, I knew exactly what kind of meeting it was going to be. I spent that night pulling every document I had: my employment contract, patent paperwork, filing dates, hardware purchase records, personal software receipts, email history, everything. The next day I walked back into Holloway's headquarters. Victor wasn't alone. Sitting beside him was corporate counsel Richard Fallon. Mid-50s, immaculate suit, expressionless face, the kind of attorney who looked like he billed by the minute and enjoyed every second of it. Fallon opened my old employment contract and turned it to a section I'd never paid serious attention to years earlier. It was their intellectual property clause. Any invention, process, system, or improvement developed during the course of employment that related directly or indirectly to the company's business interests could be claimed by the company, regardless of whether it was created on company property or using company equipment. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I built that system at home," I said, "on my own time, on my own machines." Fallon nodded as if I'd confirmed his point. "The clause does not depend on location," he said. "It depends on relevance." Victor leaned forward like he was trying to help me. "Daniel, no one wants this to become unpleasant. We value your contribution. We're willing to offer you 15% as a referral consideration if the deal moves forward. 15% of my own work, my own years, my own invention. I looked at him and said, "You gave me $500 on Friday. That was severance," Victor replied. "This is an opportunity." Fallon slid another document across the table. "If you attempt to proceed without company authorization," he said, "we'll seek injunctive relief immediately and pursue damages." In plain English, they were telling me this: fight us. And we'll bury you in process until you can't afford to stand up anymore. I left that meeting knowing one thing: I needed a real lawyer. That night I called my brother Owen, former service background, practical, hard to rattle. After listening to the whole story, he gave me one name: Laura Bennett. Laura's office was in downtown Detroit, in an old brick building not far from the federal courthouse. She had a direct handshake, a military posture, and the kind of eyes that told you she didn't waste time on nonsense. I handed her everything. She read carefully, took notes, asked precise questions. Then she looked up and asked one that changed the direction of the entire case. "Daniel," she said, "have you ever seen this company take credit for other employees' ideas before?" I thought about it. Then the names started coming back. Ron Keller, whose quality control redesign had quietly been rolled out after he retired, with leadership taking the credit. Maya Ortiz, whose safety recommendations had been buried because implementing them would have cost money. Scott Danner, who documented violations and suddenly found himself pushed to a dead-end shift before eventually quitting. Laura started digging, and the deeper she went, the uglier it got. This wasn't just an aggressive legal interpretation. It was a pattern. Former employees told similar stories, ideas repackaged, improvements absorbed, credit reassigned upward. Workers pushed out once their usefulness ended. Laura reviewed records, patent filings, executive signatures, employment histories, and internal patterns. What she found turned my private dispute into something much bigger. For years, Victor Holloway had been attaching his name to innovations he hadn't developed: processes, improvements, system designs. Other people's work. She also uncovered broader labor issues: overtime manipulation, off-the-clock expectations, and safety shortcuts leadership had treated like acceptable risk. When Laura called me with the update, her voice was calm but firm. "This isn't just about your patent anymore," she said. "This may be systemic fraud." From that point on, everything changed. Vertex was informed there was an active dispute and agreed to pause while ownership was clarified. Laura contacted the appropriate agencies, gathered sworn statements, and built a timeline that reached far beyond me. Victor kept calling. At first he sounded diplomatic, then persuasive. Then annoyed, then angry. He told me I was overreacting, told me I was threatening jobs, told me I was destroying a company built by his family. What he never understood was this: I wasn't destroying anything. I was refusing to keep protecting it. Months later, the investigation became public. Search teams entered Holloway facilities. Records were seized, servers were imaged, financial documents and legal correspondence were pulled. By afternoon, local news had the story. By the next morning, industry media had it too. Victor called me before 7 a.m. "What did you do?" he snapped. "I stopped staying quiet," I said, and hung up. The investigation widened over time. Internal communications showed deliberate efforts to structure policies around capturing employee-created value. Labor violations surfaced. Prior complaints reappeared. Names, dates, patterns, strategy, it all started connecting. The company eventually went into bankruptcy protection, and I won't lie, that part hurt. A lot of good people worked there. People who had done nothing wrong except trust the wrong leadership for too long. But Laura said something to me I'll never forget. When a building collapses because the foundation was rotten, the blame doesn't belong to the person who pointed at the crack. Once the ownership challenge cleared, Vertex came back, same offer. $1.8 million. This time there was no one left standing in the doorway trying to claim what wasn't theirs. I signed. After taxes, fees, and legal costs, I still walked away with enough money to change my life and my son's. The very first thing I did was secure Tyler's education. Not partly, fully, tuition, housing. Books, the kind of stability I'd spent years trying to build one paycheck at a time. When I told him, he just stared at me. Then he smiled and said, "So I can really go wherever I earn my way in?" "Yeah," I told him. "Now you can." I also helped my brother Owen with medical costs his family had been carrying for too long. He tried to protest. I told him the same thing any decent brother would. Family doesn't keep score. As for the people Holloway had stepped on over the years, some of them finally got their own measure of justice too. Ron used his settlement to launch a consulting practice. Maya went back into safety leadership with a better employer. Scott found his way into a role where his integrity wasn't treated like a threat. Marcus landed at a different supplier and called me one night laughing. "You know what's funny," he said. "I thought getting cut at our age meant the end. Turns out it was the first good thing that happened to us in years." He was right, because I didn't just sell a patent, I got my name back. I started my own firm, Mercer Flow Dynamics, and began helping smaller manufacturers solve the same kinds of problems Holloway had ignored for years. Vertex retained me as a consultant. For the first time in my professional life, I was being paid not just for labor, but for judgment, for ideas, for experience, for value. Now Tyler comes by on weekends, and we work in the shop together. We build small systems, repair old parts, and talk about engineering the way it should be talked about, not as a line item, but as a craft. Sometimes I still think about that Friday, the envelope. The severance, the security escort, the balloons, the cake, the nephew. And every time I do, I remember something Laura told me in our first week working together. There's a difference between loyalty and surrender. Loyalty is mutual. Surrender only benefits the person holding the power. She was right. I had spent years confusing endurance with honor. I thought staying silent made me dependable. I thought being useful would make me safe. I thought loyalty would eventually be recognized. But companies like Holloway don't reward silence. They monetize it. So if you're watching this and you've spent 10, 15, 20 years giving everything to a place that treats your experience like overhead and your loyalty like leverage, hear me clearly. Document your work. Save your records, know what you built, know what you solved, know what your time is worth, and never let someone convince you that being quiet is the same thing as being honorable. Because sometimes the most important turning point in your life starts with the moment someone underestimates you. Victor Holloway thought he was ending my story with $500 and a badge escort. What he really did was force me into the first honest chapter of my life. And that chapter was worth a whole lot more than anything he ever paid me.